Welcome to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We are happy to welcome back to the program Oliver Dean. He is a contributor for Young Voices UK. And Oliver, for those who might be meeting you for the first time, let's take just a moment here and ask you to properly introduce yourself. Tell us about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, well, firstly, Brian, good to be back. So I'm a second-year student at the London School of Economics, studying history and politics. I'm the treasurer of the LSE Hayek Society, and I'm giving my insight into politics, economics, all of that type of stuff through Young Voices.
Well, we've got a great topic to discuss today, and I know that there's always concern about tobacco use among young people, but tell me about the generational smoking ban that is poised to be signed into law in the UK.
Yeah, so the previous Conservative government led by Rishi Sunak initially proposed this ban as a means to reduce the impact of smoking on Britain's public health. And so it will essentially say that any person born after the 1st of January 2009 will be prohibited from purchasing any type of tobacco or cigarette product. And those of us who are anti-smoking ban feel that this is a fundamental attack of personal freedoms.
Okay. I have to ask, how popular is that notion? Is this something that that most people would go along with, or would there be some pushback on this?
Well, they actually did a survey when Rishi Sunak announced it previously, and it was found that upwards of 60% of the British public were supportive of the ban. Now, the problem here is that I don't think that people are necessarily supportive of the long-term implications of the plan. Rather, they see that smoking is this harmful thing, and any opportunity to reduce the impact that smoking has on public health is seen as positive. But what these people don't, I think, understand is that it sets almost like this precedent that if the government is able to intrude on personal leisure time and personal liberties in this way, what's to say that they don't go further later on down the line?
Oh, that's a good point. So let's talk a little bit about how this may be an opportunity for the Tories in particular to be reminded of how to govern as conservatives.
Yeah, so the fact that the Conservative government were the ones that initially suggested this plan was, to me, quite shocking, because I feel that every aspect of conservatism, whether we're talking about one nation conservatism or Thatcherism conservatism, the individual should always be at the center and the individual should always be prioritized. And what we've seen is the Conservative government essentially take a very unconservative approach to something that's incredibly important. And if we look at the Conservative government over the last 14 years, before they were removed from office, we can see that they weren't particularly acting very conservatively. One of the major things that they pride themselves on is being able to manage the economy, which was seen as a failure under Liz Truss. We've had the highest tax burden since the Second World War. So in 70 years, we've had the highest tax burden on the British public. Even something such as immigration, which the Conservatives pledged to reduce to the tens of thousands in the 2015 general election, we've seen reach heights of upwards of 100,000. And so the Conservatives really aren't acting in a very conservative way. They're not governing as proper Conservatives. And the fact that they're coming out now and supporting a draconian ban that will take away individual freedoms, to me, is incredibly shocking.
Oliver, I don't think a lot of people would disagree that tobacco use comes with a significant cost in terms of illnesses, in terms of lives lost. But I'm curious to hear your answer. You say when it comes to supporting an outright ban as a way to get the numbers down in terms of people affected negatively by smoking, no, you say a ban is not the best way to do that.
Yeah, and I think that there are three major reasons as to why the ban won't work, and there are obviously more, but the three major ones are, well, the first is the lack of enforceability. So there was actually a similar proposal done in New Zealand previously, and then when the national government came in a few months earlier this year, they actually repealed the ban because they said it wouldn't be enforceable. And I think we have to recognize that in a few decades' time, it's going to be the case where you're going to go down to the local shop and a 50-year-old is going to be able to buy a pack of cigarettes and a 49-year-old isn't. And so that simply won't work. It's unenforceable. But we also need to recognize that there is a major cost to the taxpayer on this. So Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer here in the UK, has been going on for a number of weeks now about the whole black hole in public finances, how there's a £22 billion black hole, and how departments are going to need to make spending cuts to try and relieve some of that financial pressure. Now, tobacco duties bring in billions of pounds every year to the public wallet. So the Office for Budget Responsibility, the OBR, has forecast that this year alone, tobacco duties are going to bring in just over £8 billion. And so when we've got our Chancellor of the Exchequer talking about how there's such a massive black hole in public finances, they're simultaneously trying to take away that £8 billion that's coming in every year. And so that's going to be a major strain on the public purse. And the final thing we need to talk about is the creation of a black market that will come as a result of this. In their current format, cigarettes are regulated and they're taxed. But if we criminalize cigarettes and tobacco products in this way, we're going to open up to underground third-party organizations that won't have the same regulation. And in actuality, this could be worse for the public health than smoking already is.
No, I think those are very sound reasons. And I'm thinking back, in the U.S., there isn't an outright ban on smoking, but there have been various laws that have been implemented. I think back when I was a kid, one of the things I remember is that pretty much everywhere you went in public, it smelled like cigarette smoke. That's a rarity nowadays. But as you point out in your article, if you really want to see smoking rates decrease, you have to present the public with a choice. I believe that's the approach that has worked very well here, even though there are still people who choose to smoke.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to this idea of maintaining personal liberties while simultaneously safeguarding public health. And what I've suggested in the article that the Conservatives should look to do is to try and provide a safer alternative than traditional combustible tobacco products. So one of the things I've highlighted is a report published by the Institute of Economic Affairs, which points out that e-cigarettes and vaping products are upwards of 95% safer than traditional tobacco products. And so if we try and move smokers who are addicted to tobacco away from traditional tobacco products and towards these safer alternatives, not only are we promoting solid and good public health, but we're still maintaining that personal freedom and that choice for the British public.
I appreciate that you addressed that too, because I know that there's a lot of pressure, and this is, I believe, in many places around the world, to try to discourage use of e-cigarettes. And yet I have heard from a number of people who were traditional tobacco smokers that the way that helped them wean themselves from combustible tobacco was through e-cigarettes. Not that they were recommending it's such an improvement, but it helped them get away from the original cigarettes that they were very much addicted to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we need to look towards making e-cigarettes and vapes more accessible, not in a way that we're necessarily promoting their use, but that we're promoting them as an alternative to these traditional tobacco products that are causing harm and strain on the NHS.
So what is the likelihood that this smoking ban, this generational smoking ban, is going to pass? Does it look like it's going to be very likely?
Well, I think most definitely, yeah. The Labour government is armed with more than 400 MPs that are lined up to support this. The British public is supportive of it. But I think that if we see a Conservative victory in the 2029 general election, there's a very good chance that they should have found their feet by then and will reverse the ban upon coming into office.
It sounds like it's going to take some work between now and then to remind people about the value of the individual and that how precious it is to be able to make your own choices.
It will indeed, but that's a journey worth going down.
I appreciate your time. Again, we're talking with Oliver Dean. He is a Young Voices contributor. And Oliver, for those who would like to follow you on social media, where can they find you?
So you can find me on Twitter and you can find me on LinkedIn.
Very good. Well, I look forward to our next conversation. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Brian.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Alex Rosado back to the program. Alex, you're not only here, but you're here on kind of short notice. Thanks for making the show.
Of course. Great to be here.
So you and I have a topic to discuss today that I almost feel a little bit silly talking about it, but it's a big play during this election year. Taylor Swift has announced her endorsement of Kamala Harris, and you actually have a marvelous article about Taylor wasting her presidential endorsement. Tell me a little bit about the thinking behind this.
So even examining the environment that happened throughout this campaign cycle, if you went back to July and said Taylor Swift would endorse Kamala Harris, that doesn't seem out of the question, but it also shows how rapid things have been changing, especially in this cycle, and the consolidation around the newfound candidate of Kamala Harris. Her campaign has had a lot of support, especially from the Democratic rank and file representatives, senators, and even a lot of celebrity and outside endorsements as well. But this isn't something that is out of the blue. This has been a foundation that has been laid throughout really the entirety of the 2024 cycle. And Taylor Swift has made her positions known about certain candidates and policies in the past. And for people to say that this is a complete shot in the dark for her to endorse Kamala Harris really haven't been paying attention. And I think the writing has been on the wall for a while.
So let's speculate a little bit. I'll be clear. We're going to speculate a little bit. She signed off as childless cat lady. Is this a shot across the bow for J.D. Vance?
Absolutely. I can't see it any other way. Jennifer Aniston beat it to her, however.
Okay. Well, this has been a very interesting election cycle, to put it mildly, but how important are celebrity endorsements? I know this is not the first time that Taylor Swift has come out and endorsed particular candidates. What kind of impact has she had in previous political races?
Well, just to speak on celebrity endorsements in general, just for a little bit, Oprah Winfrey back in 2012, when she endorsed President Obama for re-election, was very, very big. And there have been empirical studies that have come out since, and they said that Oprah's endorsement of Obama turned out at least 1 million people. But
Wow.
Ever since then, it has been diluted a lot, and especially because everybody is now socially pressured to use their platform to speak about change, talk about politics, talk about society and the things that affect people. But what most Americans don't realize, or at least they try and put this to the back of their minds, is that a lot of Hollywood elites live in that ivory tower. They can afford bad economic policies. They can afford terrible politics that aren't really affecting the lives of rural Americans and urban Americans that have to work for a paycheck to earn a living. So they're able to live in luxury and comfort while they do a lot of the brunt work. So there's a severe disconnect for it. But Taylor Swift in general has talked about politics within the 2018 Tennessee Senate election. She endorsed the opponent of Marsha Blackburn, the governor, Phil Dresden. And there was a report that came out that said Taylor Swift's endorsement turned out youth votes in Tennessee by 664%, which was decently big, although it couldn't close the margin.
Now, you make the case in your article, Alex, that she may have touched it off just a little too soon. How does timing work in something like an endorsement?
Time is of the essence. And because of the way that she announced it, not only was it on social media just right after the debate, there is now an intrinsic tie to that debate as well in Kamala's performance. And some may see it as craven opportunism, as in there's a lot of media, especially with the cycle, they're going to pounce on the debate and all the gaffes and all the action. And Taylor Swift's endorsement may fade to the backside. I mean, this debate already happened a week ago from when we're talking now, and you're not seeing a lot of buzz about it. And it's kind of already in the back of everybody's mind saying, oh, she endorsed it, this is a has-been. And really isn't getting the attention or momentum that she thought that she would get from it. And I think this was a severe miscalculation on her end.
And for that matter, I know I've seen on X for the last couple of days, former President Trump responded, I hate Taylor Swift. And I saw a lot of people say that is a mistake to respond. Let's talk about how should the Republicans respond to this latest endorsement?
With cricket noises, with nothing. I really do think that the less you pay it attention, the less of an impact it's going to have. Because any adverse reaction, such as the one that Trump had, in all caps saying, I hate Taylor Swift, that doesn't accomplish a lot. I mean, the Swifties are a very powerful fan base, not only just within the culture of American music, but also they have the ability now to influence political elections, influence economic policies, influence how we interact with one another. And especially now that a lot of campaigns are being run online within digital activism and circles that really talk about the news and form their own opinions, they're going to have a lot of sway. And these are more so the foot soldiers of the movement. And they've been engaging in a lot of remix culture, especially with edits and making sure that that outreach gets put out there. That has a big ecosystem. So enraging the fan base isn't going to really do the politicians of the Republican Party any favors.
No, that actually seems like very sound advice. I know, not just limited to Taylor Swift, but just generally, when someone is seeking to create controversy online, if you don't give them a response, you deny them exactly what they're looking for. And if my math is correct, within about 24 hours, the internet just moves on and it's forgotten.
And we've seen that too with the endorsement. There was a poll that came out by ABC News the other day that said that 81% of voters who were surveyed within this, they said that Taylor Swift's endorsement of Harris doesn't sway them in the slightest. And even as a backfire on her end, it said that 13% of survey respondents said it was less likely now that they would vote for Kamala. Only 6% said that this really had a difference in their mind and they would vote for her, or at least have more of a reason to vote for her. So on many aspects, not only with the timeliness, but the amount of people that it affects, people want a break from celebrity involvement in politics. And I do think that this poll represents it. I think that the endorsement isn't as foolproof as she thought it was going to be. And really, it seems that the American people are turning a page and focusing more on policies rather than just mouthpiece talk from influencers.
Well, something you point out in the article too is, this is not the first time. I mean, back in 2018 and 2020, that was kind of surprising, right? That look, she stepped up and actually, endorsed a candidate. By now, it's predictable, isn't it?
The novelty has worn off, and a lot of celebrities, even ones today that are refraining from stepping into politics, I think that is commendable, because they're sticking to the craft that they are set out to do. They're sticking to, say, making music or playing sports or whatever it may be that they're specialized in. And I think really that if you want to have a say on political life, of course, you can have one, but you shouldn't be socially pressured to do so. And especially in an environment where they say speak your mind, you can only speak your mind if it's with a certain agenda or, say, a certain viewpoint that is condoned by the masses. And a lot of celebrities that have spoke their minds happen to be Democratic minded. A lot of Republican actors and celebrities, you don't really get to see them a lot. Dennis Quaid played Reagan really well in that new biopic movie that came out, but nobody's clamoring to see what he has to say about celebrity and political life. So really, it just depends.
Seems like it's a good way for them to paint themselves into a corner, whether they intended to or not.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more with that statement.
So we've got about a minute or so left here, but Alex, talk to me a little bit about this particular election cycle. I just want to get your feel for it. Is there anything that strikes you as particularly remarkable or unusual about this one, knowing that there's a lot of things to choose from?
It's better to ask what's usual about this election cycle.
It'll take less time, definitely.
But I mean, the other day, President Trump was almost assassinated again. And the media rhetoric since then has not cooled a single bit. And I do think, especially with all of these confounding factors about Trump being a perceived threat to democracy, he took a bullet for democracy last time around. And he was almost going to do it again. And I truly do think that if you tune out the noise, you'll be able to get the policies and really what matters about politics for this election, because this is a very high stakes election and everybody needs to turn out for it and truly chart the course that they want to see in the future.
Well said. Again, we are talking with Alex Rosado. He is a research fellow for Horizon Info Consult and also a Young Voices contributor. Where can people follow you on social media?
My Twitter/X profile is Alex P. Rosado. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Welcome back. This is our third segment today on Moving Forward with Young Voices. Hey, I'm happy to welcome a new contributor. His name is Luca Watson. He's a writer based in London and a Young Voices contributor. And Luca, take a moment for those who are meeting you for the first time to tell us just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm a writer. I'm based in London and from the UK, as you may be able to guess from my accent. And I'm currently working freelancer on a few interesting projects, which are under wraps for now. And now I'm also a contributor with Young Voices and writing about the situation we have going on here in Old Blighty.
So I know that, man, time passes quickly, but last month was a pretty tumultuous month in the UK, and there were riots that were going on. Give us a little bit of background about why those riots were taking place, and frankly, has the dust settled, or is it continuing to settle? What's the situation there?
Well, tumultuous is one way of putting it. Essentially, we had a new government come in at the beginning of the summer. Labour came in, and they didn't get off to an easy start, I think it's fair to say. So in August, there were a series of riots which came about as a result of a stabbing spree that took place here in England at a nursery, with lots of little children were stabbed, and sadly, tragically, 3 of them lost their lives. And after that took place, a very shocking event, there wasn't much information from the police on exactly who the perpetrator was. And so lots of rumors started spreading online about exactly who it was and what happened. Turns out most of them were false. We know that now. But at the time, as I said, the police weren't obliged. They weren't telling everyone who it was. And essentially a series of riots broke out in the subsequent days and weeks all across the country. It started in Southport, the town where this stabbing spree took place, and then it quickly spread all across England, mostly in some of the most deprived parts of the country. And it was mostly, I guess you could call it an anti-immigration type riot. That was the sentiment behind it. It was finally revealed after a few days that the individual who committed this horrible attack was of Rwandan origin. His parents were Rwandan, though he was born here in the UK. He was a minor at the time of the attack, which is why he wasn't named straight away. He was 17 years old. And and it quickly just blew up, got really out of control, and some pretty ugly scenes followed.
Now, the story that you and I are going to discuss, though, is when it comes to sentences for those who participated in those riots, there seems to be a bit of a double standard in terms of how the judges are handing down punishment. Talk to me about what has happened to those who have been found to have participated in those riots.
Yeah, so it spawned this whole catchphrase, the two-tier Keir, after Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, two-tier policing. The sense that in the wake of the riots, the justice system went really into overdrive and gave out some sentences which were far, far harsher than is the norm in the United Kingdom. And this was intentional. So the Prime Minister at the time came out and announced that he was going to crack down hard on anyone involved. And so many of the people were committing serious crimes or smashing windows and so on, but also caught up in these rounds of judicial retribution and this crackdown were people who just put out tweets or messages on Facebook, comments on Facebook, on social media. Now, some of them were insightful, and they were inciting a riot and so on, or some of them were racially aggravated. But, some of them were, they're illegal, but I think it's hard to justify just how harsh some of these sentences have been. As I say, especially within the wider context of judicial, the courts being quite lax in general here in the United Kingdom. And we also have a prison overcrowding issue, which means that in the last few weeks, prisoners have been let out early. They've been released early into their sentences because there simply isn't the prison capacity now to hold everyone.
Let's give a couple of examples of some of the leniency that has been shown to people who have actually committed violent crimes as opposed to simply posted insensitive or unpopular opinions on social media.
Yeah, so one of the examples I used, which was quite shocking, is the same judge within the same week who gave out 2 different sentences. And one sentence she gave out was 3 years imprisonment, a 3-year custodial sentence for a man who was putting out social media posts which were intended to stir up racial hatred and incite violence. Now, obviously, that is a crime, But 3 years is, I say, quite a significant amount of time as a custodial sentence for social media posts. And that same judge, just a few days before, gave a suspended sentence, meaning the convict was going to spend no time in prison, to a man who went on a very, very vicious assault. This is unrelated to the riots. This happened a good number of months before the riots, and left a man bleeding and unconscious in the middle of the road after kicking him in the head repeatedly. I mean, incredible amounts of violence on display here. And yet the person there, he went out, no jail sentence, no custodial sentence whatsoever. So these are the same judges who are giving out these very, very different sentences based on whether the crime was part of the broader riots or whether it was just seen as a normal crime.
Yeah, I think a person could be forgiven if they maybe read there was a bit of an ideological slant to the sentences, how those sentences are being handed down. The punishment seems much more severe for people who were either supportive or participating in the riots as opposed to violent crimes.
Yeah. And I think the frustrating thing for me is what I find really frustrating about this is that it does show that when push comes to shove, when things really get rough and the state feels itself to be threatened, as it was during these riots, because now we have the benefit of hindsight, but right in the middle of it, there was a period where it looked like this could escalate quite significantly and this could turn into something that might threaten the stability of the British state. So when push comes to shove, the state recognizes the importance of custodial sentences, how they can be effective in stamping out crime. And yet normally, the rest of the time, it talks about how prison isn't really the answer, how it doesn't really work, how it's best to have sentences in the community and so on. And what that does, it puts the rest of us always at risk from dangerous criminals. So it does show that there is this cognitive dissonance going on here. They know, the state knows that prison works. When it feels itself threatened, it acts upon that. But for the rest of the time, for the rest of us, when it comes to muggings and robberies and assaults and that sort of stuff, we don't get that protection. We don't get those dangerous people locked up for a significant amount of time as they should be.
Luca, that seems like it would really cause some, as you mentioned, cognitive dissonance in the minds of the public, where the government is there to help protect them against, violent predators, two-legged violent predators. And yet it seems like the government is more intent on protecting itself or its ideological fellow travelers than it is the public. Does that sentiment carry any weight among the public in the UK?
Yeah, so as I said, in the wake of the sentences, there's this phrase two-tier policing, two-tier justice that came out and it became quite a big jibe against the new prime minister. This sense that there's one rule for some and another rule for others. And it is something that has gained momentum, even though the riots now over a month ago, it's still a phrase that's used quite often. So I think there still is that enduring frustration at this double standard taking place.
Is there any way to essentially alter course and restore confidence, the public's confidence in the system of justice to where they don't feel like it's being selectively applied, against some and maybe a wink and a nod for others?
Well, I think we're a long way from that. I don't think Keir Starmer and the Labour government think that's a priority or are going to do that anytime soon. As I said, one of the main reasons is that there simply isn't the prison capacity at this moment in time. We're letting prisoners free because there aren't enough prison spaces. So I don't think we're going to see a big crackdown on what they call petty crime and sort of career criminals anytime soon. And I think there is a risk that if this happens again, this could escalate and this frustration could continue to grow, and it could really delegitimize the state as the authority on justice, on law and order, as it continues to not keep its citizens safe.
Luca, one final question. We only have about 30 seconds for this, but wasn't that one of the reasons why there were people protesting in the streets, was they felt that government wasn't doing enough to protect them and their children? Yes,
exactly. That's a sad irony, is that one of the reasons people were so angry is that they felt that the state was not doing enough, that little children here, the people most vulnerable, most in need of protection, were clearly not protected. A tragic event took place, their lives were lost, and there was a sense that the government, not just through justice, but also through the immigration system, through not really vetting people, is not keeping our streets safe, not keeping vulnerable people, children safe, and it's a frustration that I think will endure for quite a while.
Again, we're talking with Luca Watson. He's a writer based in London and a contributor with Young Voices. Luca, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on. Thank you.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. This is our fourth and final segment today. I want to welcome Hudson Crozier, who is joining us as a Young Voices contributor. And Hudson, for a lot of folks that are going to be meeting you for the first time, take a moment, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so thanks for having me on. I'm Hudson Crozier. I am studying journalism at the University of North Texas, and I've been published kind of all over the place. I'm the associate editor at Upward News, a reporter for the College Fix, and I just like covering important issues.
Well, I'm looking at a piece you wrote for the American Spectator, and I have to admit, this kind of set me back in my seat because I realize we are fast approaching the first anniversary of the October 7th attacks on Israel, and I can't believe it's already been almost a year. You point out in this article that some people are going to be observing it as a very somber day of remembrance, but others are actually planning celebration rallies. What is up with that?
So a bunch of anti-Israel groups, 6 of them in particular, some of them kind of well-known, are organizing these big rallies across the country planned for Saturday, October 5th. Some of these groups are like Palestinian Youth Movement and Students for Justice in Palestine. That one in particular is pretty well known by now. And they're calling it 1 year of genocide and 1 year of resistance, the resistance being Hamas fighting Israel. And they describe in their Instagram post October 7th as more or less a day when the Palestinians showed the world that they will continue resisting their colonizer, paraphrasing a little bit. So in other words, this was a moment that can not only be excused, but actually celebrated because it made progress for the Palestinian people, according to these organizations. And so there will be rallies from Canada to Dallas to the DMV area, all over the place.
Wow. I just can't imagine that helping things, as far as calming things down in any way, shape, or form. Talk to me about what we have seen over this past year, because it seems like the October 7th attacks initially were met with a lot of expressions of horror and condemnation, and yet we saw protest after protest, come up on the college campuses. What has happened during this last year that was noteworthy?
So a lot of people, the world did kind of recoil in horror when the attacks happened, but not really this hardcore activist movement. It never had any qualms with it. People from the moment it happened were coming out in support of it or just sort of making excuses for it. But I mean, just this past summer, I was in DC covering some of the biggest protests that had happened, not on college campuses, but around Washington, DC, by a lot of these groups. And there was just example after example, as I go through in my article, of people praising terrorists, praising October 7th, praising specific terrorist groups, wearing their headbands. One guy had a sign saying Allah is going to bring a final solution against Jews. And it wasn't all like Muslim extremists like that. I mean, one person I saw holding a Hamas flag looked like your average white 20-something female with a COVID mask on. So it's a weird mixture going on here.
One of the things that really stands out in my mind is someone was asking some of the protesters, so why exactly are you protesting? In other words, asking them, please articulate what your stance is. And it was surprising how many of these young protesters were just stumped. Well, I don't really know. You point out in your article that there's kind of a Marxist dynamic that's at work here, that revolutionary fervor where, hey, they're happy to jump in and join the protest, but may not even realize or understand what it is that they're protesting.
Well, the elites sort of at the top of this movement, the actual activist leaders and the organizations sort of organizing all this stuff, they know what they're doing. And as I've mentioned, it is deeply rooted in kind of this Marxist adjacent worldview that is an ideology that basically excuses mass violence and extreme violence by putting people in these oppressed and oppressor groups. In this case, it's the evil Zionist Jewish colonizers and the minority Palestinian Arabs. And so they just kind of fit it into that framework. And then it's like in their mind, it doesn't need any further thought. And so at so many of these protests, I see hammers and sickles, the Soviet symbol. I saw people praising Che Guevara, the Cuban revolutionary. It's a very kind of incestuous movement merging. It's very strange, honestly, merging this support for like jihadist extremists in the Middle East and communist regimes, because they're basically just violent birds of a feather.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be rude when I say this, but that term "useful idiots," that I think it was Lenin who referred to them, that seemed to be on display, and I feel bad for the young people who are drawn into it, but it's not like there wasn't solid proof of what Hamas did. I'm just trying to get my mind around, why would people want to celebrate that as something noteworthy and laudable?
Right. Like I said, it's just an ideology that looks at people in terms of groups. And a lot of this functions on simply euphemisms, just creating euphemisms for things. Like I said, this Instagram post announcing the rallies, it refers to October 7th and Hamas in general as just resistance. You will hear the word resistance constantly at these demonstrations, on the social media posts of these organizations. And it's just kind of a way of softening the reality of what Hamas really did and continues to do, which is it ran into Israel, basically running through neighborhoods, shooting anything that moved, men, women, and children. They raped women, paraded their bodies through the streets. Forensics people in Israel released pictures of like a mother or a parent and a child, their corpses holding each other while they had been burned alive in their homes, things of that nature. They've taken hostages that they still have. Some of those were American hostages. I'm not sure if they still have American citizens, but they've still got hostages. Some of the women who have been rescued from that situation are telling stories of sexual assault, just on and on and on and on and on. But no, it's resistance, according to these people. Well,
and there is a definite bloodlust, and sadly, I see that bloodlust sometimes spill over even to the pro-Israel side. I'm going to criticize Ben Shapiro mildly. Some of his most heated rhetoric came, in the wake of this. Is there anyone that you are aware of who is acting the role of a peacemaker or trying to otherwise bring down the heat that's related to these events?
As far as these demonstrations and protests themselves, I haven't really found any. In fact, what's kind of hilarious and ironic is one of the groups. So one of the protests is going to be in Dallas, one of these rallies coming up in October. One of the groups sort of convening the whole thing calls itself the DFW Anti-War Committee. And so we have anti-war groups, quote unquote, partnering with these organizations that love Hamas. There's also one that's a little more well-known called Jewish Voice for Peace. Jewish Voice for Peace, for example, basically mourned the death of a Hamas leader, Ismail Haniyeh, by posting about him positively on social media several weeks ago. So it's a very strange hypocrisy going on where anti-war groups, so to speak, are just only anti a particular war. They are just against Israel's war, but can't seem level of harsh condemnation on Hamas's actions.
Well, here's hoping that October 5th comes and goes without anything, too untoward happening. But it's disturbing to know that there are people who are, trying to rally and I guess build political support around these events.
Right. Well, I can't always read into people's minds or see their motives, but I can document their actions. So that's what I'm doing. And I will be on the ground covering the one that's happening in Dallas coming up. And I would just finish by saying, just in case there was any doubt as to whether they really are celebrating October 7th, because technically these rallies are October 5th. It's a Saturday. The original Instagram post had a picture from October 7th of a Palestinian man standing on a tank with a flag. It was literally taken from news coverage of those attacks, and Meta took the post down because it violated their policies against endorsing dangerous people and organizations. So they want no ambiguity as to who and what they're celebrating.
Well, I hope you stay safe, but I look forward to our next conversation because I expect we'll have a lot to talk about.
All right, thanks for having me.
All right, we're talking with Hudson Crozier. He's a contributor to Young Voices. Hudson, where can people find you on social media?
So you can look up my first and last name on X and Instagram. That's Hudson Crozier. That's Crozier. And then you can just look at the different places I've been published. Upward News. We put out a newsletter every day covering politics and national and international issues.